This is the story of La Llorona, which is a Mexican legend, and it is aimed for 11 to 15-year-olds. There was a girl named Maria. She was born in a poor pueblo just south of the border. And as Maria grew from a baby to a child to a young adult, everybody in the village started to notice that she was beautiful. Maria was gorgeous. She had this long, shiny black hair, and it was so black that in the sun it shone like a bright blue ribbon. She had these beautiful almond eyes, and her skin was as soft as a brand new flower. She was gorgeous. So time passed, and as Maria got a little bit older, Maria started to realize that she was beautiful. She realized how pretty she actually was. All the boys in her village started coming up to Maria, and they were trying to flirt with her and trying to give her kisses and trying to win her affections, but Maria wasn't having any of it. She knew that she was gorgeous and that the most gorgeous woman in the land has to marry the most handsome man in the world. None of the boys in her village would do. None of them were good enough for Maria. She had to have the most handsome man, so she didn't let any of them near her. No, thank you. So one day, a very handsome stranger came to town riding atop his horse. His name was Marco, and he was gorgeous. He had this really thick, wavy hair and these dark brown eyes, and he was strong and he had muscles. His skin was bronze because he worked out in the sun. Marco was a rancher, and he worked out on the prairie, and he would go and he would find the wild horses and he would capture them and try to break them. And so he was a very strong, rugged man, and a lot of people said Marco was just about as wild as the horses that he tried to tame. They all said that it would take a mighty special woman to one day be able to tame Marco. Well, when Maria saw him, she thought, wow, that's it. That's the guy. That's who I've been looking for. That's the most handsome man in the whole world. I have to have him. He's going to be my husband. Well, unfortunately for Maria, every other girl in the entire village thought the exact same thing. So they all were vying for his attention, and they were trying to get him, and they were flirting and kissing and showing him affection. And so Maria realized that if she wanted Marco to pay attention to her, she was going to have to do something a little bit different. But luckily, Maria was very skilled at getting her way, and she knew just what to do to get Marco's attention. So Maria decided she was going to make Marco jealous. So she didn't talk to him at all. She ignored him 100%. If Marco tried to talk to her, she just turned the other cheek and she ignored him. She was talking with all the other boys in the village and flirting with them and laughing with them. But if Marco tried to talk to her, she ignored him. She didn't want to have anything to do with him. Well, after a couple of days, it started to work. Marco couldn't figure out why the beautiful Maria wouldn't give him the time of day. He thought she was gorgeous and he was handsome. Like, why was this a problem? But Maria wouldn't talk to him, and he was desperate to find out why. He decided that he was going to pursue her with all he had, so he bought her expensive gifts every day, and every day she sent him back to Marco. And he sat under her window and got his guitar because he was a very good singer. And he sang her songs all night long, and poor Maria, she didn't come to the window. She didn't even light a candle. She didn't acknowledge that he was there at all. So after days and days and days and days and days of Marco trying to woo Maria and her completely ignoring him, he decides, all right, this is it. Here is my last ditch effort, my end all be all. This is how I'm going to get Maria. So he goes out and he finds the most beautiful rose that he can find. It's this beautiful red rose, and it's perfect. It's brand new. The petals are just opening. It's the most beautiful flower you've ever seen. So he takes it and he goes to find Maria. And he finds her walking all alone on a road. And so he approaches her and he gives her the flower. And Maria looks at it, and there's something different this time. I don't know. Maybe it's the way that his eyes seem to just soften and he smiled at her, or the way that he just gently caressed her cheek with his rough hands. But Maria finally broke, and she decided that now was the time. And so she took the flower from Marco and she gave him a big old kiss. Well, Marco and Maria decided they were going to get married just a few weeks later. Marco, after being ignored for so long, didn't want to wait any longer to make Maria his. She finally decided to pay attention to him. He was going to seal the deal right then. No more waiting. So they ran off and threw the biggest, best wedding the village had ever seen. It was gorgeous. Maria wore a long, beautiful gown, and the flower girls threw red rose petals all over the floor for her to walk on. The entire village was there, and it was magical. And Maria and Marco moved off and they bought their own little house, and they had a couple of kids. Both of them were sons, which made them very, very happy. And everybody, including Maria, thought that they were going to live happily ever after. Things were perfect. What could happen? Well, things were going great, except Marco started to get bored with his life. He was bored. He missed his adventures out on the plains. He missed his wild horses. He missed everything about his life before he married Maria. He loved his sons. He loved having his two boys. But there was something about just being married that he didn't like. He would go away for weeks and weeks and weeks at a time out on the prairie, kind of claiming his old life and working with the horses, and he would come back and he would miss his sons and he would dote on them and he would love them. But he gave none of that to Maria. He would leave her for weeks, and then when he came back, he acted like he didn't even miss her. He kind of resented her a little bit because he didn't want to be tamed, and she had kind of done that to him. So Maria was really sad because she was noticing what was happening with Marco, and she didn't want her husband to be unhappy, but she couldn't figure out how to make him happy. She tried everything she could. She tried to keep him happy. She tried to keep him home, but no matter what he did, or she did, he didn't seem to want to be with her anymore. So one day Maria was out walking and Marco was off doing whatever Marco did, and she saw him on the road. So she ran and she hid behind a tree real quick, and so that way she could spy on him. And unfortunately, Maria saw Marco walking hand in hand with a woman. Now this woman was gorgeous. She had this long curly black hair that fell down to her waist in the back, and it was the color of chocolate. It was beautiful. She had these big wide eyes, and her lips were the color of the roses that Marco used to buy for Maria. So Maria watched heartbroken as Marco smiled at this woman the way that he used to smile at her. And she watched as he caressed her cheek the way that he used to do to her. And she watched as Marco leaned down and kissed this woman, just like he used to kiss his wife. Maria's heart shattered. She was so upset. That was her husband, her love. He didn't love her anymore. She wasn't good enough for him anymore. What was wrong? Why didn't he love her anymore? And she couldn't figure out what to do. Her heart was broken, and she sat and she cried and she cried and she cried. Well, after a few minutes, those tears of despair, they turned to ones of jealousy. She was trying to figure out what this woman had that she didn't have. And then after a few minutes of being jealous, Maria turned into rage. How dare Marco? She was so mad at him. How could he do this to her, to their life? Wasn't he happy? She gave him sons. She gave him a home. What more did he want from her? So, in a fit of rage, Maria stormed home, and she opened the door and she grabbed her two sons by the hand and she walked him outside, and she stood on the bank of the river with both of her boys. And without saying a single word, she took their hands and she threw them into the river. Now, at first she thought, ha, there you go, Marco. You love these boys more than you love me. You don't love me, you love your sons. Well, I'm going to make you heartbroken just like you made me heartbroken. I don't have you anymore. You don't have your sons anymore. But then after a second, Maria realized exactly what she had done. And when she figured it out, she started screaming. She was horrified. How could I do that? Those are my boys. What did I do? Oh my goodness. So Maria dove into the river and she started swimming frantically, trying to find her boys. And the rapids were pulling her this way and that. And she almost hit her head on a rock. And she kept swimming, trying to find her boys. But it was to no avail because Maria's sons were never seen or heard from again. So after what felt like forever, Maria crawled out of the river up onto the bank where she collapsed and just sat and cried and cried and cried. She was so heartbroken. She lost Marco and now she lost her boys. She had no one. So after a few hours of her sitting on the riverbank, some villagers came along and they took her back to their home and they dressed her in this long white dress and they tried to feed her some food and Maria wouldn't eat any of it. And so she slept, and then the next morning she got up and she left the house and she walked all along the riverbank in her white dress, back and forth, screaming, my boys, my sons, where are you, where are you? And of course she never found them. Well, this is what happened day in, day out with Maria. Every day she woke up, she didn't eat a morsel, and she walked out along the riverbank where her sons died, calling for them, my boys, my sons, where are you, where are you? But never once did she find them. So after doing this for weeks and weeks and weeks, Maria grew skinnier and skinnier and skinnier until she almost looked like a skeleton because she hadn't been eating. And one day, after calling my sons, my boys, where are you, where are you? Maria laid down on the bank of the river and she never got up again. She died right there. So a few weeks after Maria passed, some people in the village started reporting some strange things that they were hearing. They were saying at night they could hear these anguished cries and somebody yelling. It sounded almost like, my boys, my sons, my sons. But nobody could really figure out what was happening. A few kids had said that they saw a lady in a white dress walking along by the river. And one boy said that he had walked too close to her and she tried to grab him. And so he ran away back home. And so that's what happened. Her name is not Maria anymore. Everyone knows her as La Llorona, or the Weeping Woman. And every night she walks along the riverbank where her sons died, yelling for them, my sons, trying to find them. And if you're a little kid and you get too close while she's calling for her sons, she might mistake you for one of them and take you instead. So they always say, when you hear the cries of La Llorona, run inside, so that way you don't get taken by mistake.